Today, you'll learn why frogs learn to control their blood, why bumblebees play ball, what the mood color of volcanoes depends on, why birds can't get enough sleep, and how tough cows can be. For a long time, scientists thought that evolution takes quite a long time. Animals require several generations to adapt to new environmental conditions. You know, natural selection and all that. But a paper published in the journal Nature in 2016 proves that sometimes natural selection doesn't take that long. All it takes is one industrial revolution. In the early 19th century, peppered moths in Britain had salt and pepper coloring and were doing just fine. But over the years, there were increasingly more black moths. A 2016 study uncovered the gene responsible for this, and it turned out that the moth color change coincided with Britain's transition to coal burning. But if you think the peppered moths turned black on purpose because of coal, well, no, it was a little different. Instead of causing mutation, the conditions of the Industrial Revolution created the perfect backdrop for black moths to survive. As soot covered surfaces across Britain, black moths blended in with their background more effectively, enabling them to avoid predators. The survivors passed on their genes, and through the wonders of natural selection, black moths became more widespread. Perhaps now that coal is no longer such a popular source of energy, peppered moths will relax and go back to their original color. By the way, the caterpillars of this moth also change color. Well, it seems logical, doesn't it? What's so interesting about that? The thing is, caterpillars don't actually see color, they feel it with their skin. Scientists found this out when they blindfolded the caterpillars during an experiment, but they were still able to pick the right color to blend in with the branch. This unique sensory characteristic helps the caterpillar camouflage itself by mimicking the color, shape, and texture of its environment. In short, they do everything they can to avoid being eaten. Speaking of color change caused by the Industrial Revolution, I gotta mention the city where the first all-black version of the peppered moth was observed in 1848. The final stage of natural selection, so to speak. It was Manchester. And if you know the city's history, you're probably thinking, well, that's hardly surprising. For those of you who aren't history buffs, here's a little recap. That's how a man who visited Manchester in 1847 described the city. One receives the first intimation of Manchester's existence from the lurid gloom of the atmosphere that overhangs it. There's a murky blot in one section of the sky, however clear the weather, which broadens and heightens as we approach. And now the innumerable chimneys come in view, tall and dim in the dun haze, each bearing atop its own pennant of darkness. Sounds poetic, right? You bet it does. But the air was so polluted that in the Victorian area, Manchester was even called the chimney of the world. Coal-powered steam engines filled the air with toxic coal smoke. Residents and workers suffered from gloomy dark skies, dirty houses and clothes, respiratory illnesses, and increased mortality. Yet they simply referred to this grave pollution as the smoke nuisance. The thick smoke was coming from the factories as well as from the houses, because they also had to be heated. Later, scientific analysis of the effects of coal smoke on humans showed that it was the small particles of smoke that posed the greatest health risk. Meanwhile, by the end of the 19th century, there were already 2,000 industrial chimneys polluting the air in and around Manchester. And you know, it's not surprising that animals started to adapt to that. What other choice did they have? Another example of a relatively quick evolutionary adaptation is a plant called the Fritillaria delavayi. Once upon a time, it was not difficult to find it in the Hengduan Mountains. Once a year, the plant produced a bright yellow tulip-shaped flower. A yellow flower with bright green leaves. It was quite easy to notice it against the gray landscape of the mountains. But recently, people have begun to notice that once bright flowers have been replaced by brown ones. But not because the plants are sick. Scientists suspect that the plant genetically develops drabber colors to hide from its main predator, humans. Fritillaria delavayi is used in traditional Chinese medicine to treat lung conditions like bronchitis. Whether the plant actually helps or not is a different question, but people have been collecting and using it for at least 2,000 years. Apparently, for a long time, the plant was cool with that. But the demand increased, the market value grew, flowers were harvested more often. Eventually, the plant had to do something about it. And this is actually quite unusual. Usually, when it comes to extensive harvesting, plants just get smaller because the larger ones are picked before they have time to spread. But changing the color for the sake of camouflage? That's really something unique. Scientists also found that in areas with fewer people, the plants remained bright green and yellow, but in places where they were harvested in large numbers, their color changed. Researchers have even created a game called Spot the Plant to test how easy it is to find camouflaged flowers. Let's check it out. We'll show you a photo, and you'll have 5 seconds to find the flower. You get it, right? That's actually hard. But let's get back to the animals. To avoid being eaten, they tend to choose one of the 2 strategies. Some species adapt by blending in with their surroundings, while others opt for vibrant coloration. This is the message they send to predators. I am poisonous. Naturally, when you're poisonous, a very limited number of other animals can hunt you. Which of these strategies is better? It's hard to say. But there's a problem with the second one. Secreting toxins requires tremendous energy expenses from the body. So many animals simply pretend to be toxic. This is actually very dangerous because changing color doesn't happen overnight. You can't simply become, for example, bright red instead of the usual brown. The chances of being caught and eaten during the color change phase are very high. Why take such a huge risk? As it usually happens in nature, it's all for the sake of offspring. The higher the risk, the higher the reward. The increased chance of becoming prey now is offset by complete safety for the offspring, so there's no clear-cut answer which is better, hiding or threatening the enemy with bright colors. But what if the color change has nothing to do with the environmental adaptation? What if animals look different because of radiation? In 2016, researchers discovered a surprising phenomenon near the damaged nuclear reactor in Chernobyl. Several eastern tree frogs of an unusual color. This species usually has a bright green back coloration, but the frogs they found had turned dark. Poor creatures looked as if they were burned, as if they'd been badly affected by radiation. Okay, actually the coloration has nothing to do with the level of radiation the frogs are exposed to these days, but to understand how things work here, we first have to talk about a pigment called melanin. Melanin is responsible for the dark color of many organisms. It's also known that this class of pigment can reduce the negative effects of ultraviolet radiation. Its protective role can also extend to ionizing radiation. Melanin absorbs and dissipates some of the radiation energy. In addition, it can scavenge and neutralize ionized molecules inside the cell. In short, all this reduces the likelihood of radiation damage to cells and increases the chances of survival. Knowing all this, the frogs turning darker makes perfect sense. The eastern tree frogs from Chernobyl may have undergone a process of rapid evolution in response to radiation exposure. It's likely that during the accident, frogs with darker coloration, which are typically a minority in the population, were protected by melanin. As a result, it would be these frogs that would eventually reproduce more successfully. More than 10 generations of frogs have passed since the accident, and a classic, albeit very rapid, process of natural selection has made darker eastern tree frogs dominant in the Chernobyl exclusion zone. Of course, frogs are not the only animals that have gone through changes since the Chernobyl disaster. In general, since wildlife returned to some areas, the population of large mammals has exceeded pre-disaster numbers. Bears, wolves, lynxes, bison, deer, moose, beavers, foxes, badgers, wild boars, and raccoon dogs are just some of the species that seem to have found a happy home in the radioactive zone. They're quite comfortable without humans. Though in this particular zone, things may not be going as good as they seem. The number of genetic mutations associated with the Chernobyl accident is reported to have increased by a factor of 20. This is especially true for small mammals such as voles and wild dogs, which are more likely to have cataracts. Their eyes are the first tissue to show signs of chronic exposure to ionizing radiation. Moreover, populations of useful bacteria on the wings of birds are lower than elsewhere, also because of the radiation at Chernobyl. The birds have a smaller brain, which is reflected in their head volume compared to birds living outside the area. Partial albinism has also become more common among barn swallows living nearby, but there's also good news. The most serious mutations happened right after the accident, which means that the animals that were subjected to them didn't have long to live. Most of them died when they were barely born, so they didn't have time to pass on the damaged genes. Therefore, the inhabitants of the exclusion zone are much healthier than one could have imagined. That doesn't mean that radiation gives them any superpowers. It only happens in comic books because evolution doesn't need reasons to give animals something special, like for making glass frogs invisible. Glass frogs are experts at camouflaging. As nocturnal creatures, they spend their days sleeping on vibrant green leaves, blending in almost seamlessly thanks to their translucent bodies. This camouflage protects them from predators, but scientists recently discovered that these frogs can also change the color of their blood. Blood is an obstacle when it comes to achieving true invisibility. Even if you manage to grow transparent tissues, the body still needs red blood cells to stay alive. Red blood cells, as the name implies, are red, and they are pretty visible. However, the glass frogs have figured out how to fix that. They remove about 89% of their red blood cells out of circulation and hide them in their liver while they sleep. At night, when it gets dark, the frogs return their blood to its normal color. But you know what struck scientists the most? The frogs do this trick regularly and have no health issues at all. And in most vertebrates, gathering all the red blood cells in one place usually results in clotting. But glass frogs are doing just fine. As a child, I remember being fascinated by the idea that animals could have blood with colors other than red, such as blue, green, or even purple. Ever thought about that? For example, some crustaceans, squids, and octopuses have blue blood. It's the same with horseshoe crabs. Their blood is even collected for scientific purposes. Horseshoe crabs' blood clots on contact with bacterial toxins, making it a cool tool for testing medicines and vaccines. Green blood is found in some worms and skinks. And in Vulcans, of course, but that's a different story. There's even an animal with transparent blood. An entire family of white-blooded fish that lives in the cold waters of the Antarctic and subantarctic has no blood pigment at all, thanks to a genetic mutation. It simply removed hemoglobin from its body. Oxygen's abundant in the habitat of these fish, and the gas seeps in right through the gills and skin. Yes, it's all about oxygen. In humans, it's carried by the protein called hemoglobin. But before hemoglobin, there was hemocyanin. It emerged 2.5 billion years ago and served to detoxify oxygen in primordial organisms in low-oxygen environments. Hemoglobin evolved much later, probably about 400 million years ago. Most likely, it came about because vertebrates developed a more complex respiratory system than simple organisms. Horseshoe crabs are ancient creatures, and their method of oxygen transportation remains the same, which is why they still have blue blood. Other animals have unusual blood for pretty much the same reason. Well, the proteins that carry oxygen are distinct, but I won't go into the specifics and bore you. So we were talking about animal adaptations, right? The green dock beetle knows how to create dryness beneath its feet. Actually, the very fact that an insect can stick to surfaces and walk on walls could probably only surprise a child, but the green dock beetle has gone one step further. It's learned how to stick to surfaces under the water. The secret of this trick lies in the multitude of small bubbles under its feet. This insect can move underwater by literally walking on air. But how is this even possible? On the one hand, the green dock beetle hasn't invented anything unusual. It moves perfectly well on land thanks to the thousands of hairs on its feet. They reach into the microscopic nooks of everything underfoot and enhance the adhesive power. Kind of like the spikes on winter tires, you know? Some beetles also add sticky oil to the hairs. But all these adaptations are powerless in the watery environment. You would need dryness for good adhesion. When the green dock beetle immerses itself in water, it traps air bubbles in the hairs and holds them there securely. The bubbles displace the water below the beetle's foot and create a tiny dry spot. This is where the oily hairs come in, which stick just as well as on dry land. Well, you have to admit, that's genius. And while green dock beetles are walking underwater, the fishing spiders are running across its surface. They use surface tension. Water molecules are attracted to each other, and that bond is stronger at the surface where water meets air. Spiders take advantage of this. They are also hydrophobic, meaning that water is repelled by them, keeping them from getting wet. When a spider dips its legs into the liquid, it makes a dimple in it. And this creates an area that acts almost like the hull of a boat. Essentially, each leg makes its own supporting dimple in the water. Overall, this spider is kinda like a tiny boat. I wonder if these animals realize what they're doing, or how cool that is, especially from a human perspective. You have to admit, few people think about how smart some green dock beetle might be. Bumblebees, meanwhile, know how to play with balls. I'm serious. Bumblebees are associated with life or work rather than entertainment, but not long ago, researchers discovered that these insects can play, and they also enjoy it. In experiments, scientists found that bumblebees roll balls if given the opportunity, even if there's no visible incentive to do so. Young bumblebees roll more balls than older ones, and males take longer than females to do so. To figure this all out, the researchers developed an experimental arena where 45 bumblebees had the opportunity to either walk along the path without any obstacles to get a treat or enter the area with wooden balls. And in the vast majority of cases, the insects preferred the balls. Individual bumblebees rolled the balls up to 117 times during the experiment. Let that sink in. When choosing between food and play, they preferred play. And the repetitive behavior only further indicates that ball rolling brings real satisfaction to bumblebees. In fact, it proves that the mind of bees is much more complex than one might think. Usually, this behavior can be observed in young birds and mammals, but mammals are actually a lot like us. Have you heard, for example, about dolphins that trained humans to hunt together? Yes, it was the dolphins who trained humans, not the other way around. For more than 140 years, fishermen in southeastern Brazil have maintained an unusual partnership with local dolphins. In the small coastal town of Laguna, the men wait for the marine mammals to swim closer, herding silvery mullet from the Atlantic Ocean into shallow water. As soon as fishermen spot a dolphin slapping its tail, lifting its head, and diving deep, they race into the water with their nets. A new study shows that dolphins seem to be willing partners in this collaboration. They watch humans closely, timing their actions so as to maximize their catch. There's evidence from marine biologists that dolphins even guide the fishermen, showing them where to stand, when to throw the net. That is, dolphins literally train them. As a result, fishermen get up to 86% of their catch thanks to their cooperation with dolphins. But even if either the fisherman or the dolphin makes a mistake, they both lose their catch. And it's not necessarily a matter of poor communication. It's just that dolphins can be shy. Studies of the animal personalities, from insects to songbirds, from octopuses to primates, have revealed there are both bold and shy individuals. It's the same thing with dolphins. Bold dolphins can be especially helpful to their pod. For example, when it comes to finding food, sociable individuals help spread important social information to the pod. For example, when there's food around. Naturally, more sociable dolphins have stronger social bonds than shy ones. Also, a bold animal is more likely to approach a new object or explore a potential predator than a shy one. On the other hand, you can accidentally die if you act like this. On the other hand, you might get a snack or help the fisherman. Some animals aren't exactly shy about using humans for their own purposes. For example, whale sharks don't mind approaching a boat to scratch the itch. Jason, a fisherman from Queensland, observed the following scene in the waters of the Coral Sea. A shark was purposefully scratching against the underside of his boat. It was acting quite friendly, and the man even considered whether to jump into the water to say hi. It's believed that sea creatures exhibit this behavior in order to rid themselves of parasites that gather on their skin while they journey through warm waters. Whales often scratch against the sand, and dolphins have been seen rubbing against the pebbles, all near the shore. But this whale shark apparently decided there was no point in swimming to the land for a good scratch when there was such a wonderful boat around. Female humpback whales have gone even further. Usually, humpback whales prefer to spend time in small groups or even totally alone. But when the breeding season begins, males seem to go nuts. They chase one female in groups, and it's a very long race that only the toughest can endure. But speed and distance aren't the only challenges. Whales often attack each other underwater. Someone can't keep up, but its place is often taken by another suitor. And sometimes females don't want to be chased or fought for. Maybe they have their own stuff to do, but the males wouldn't let them get to it. And then they intentionally swim to the boats and stay as close to them as possible to get rid of persistent suitors. Female humpback whales use people as shields. After all, many whales are afraid of boats and prefer not to approach them unless they have to. And while humpback whales are having a hard time with their relationships, let's take a look at a stork named Klepeton. They call him the most faithful male in the world. Almost every year for more than 2 decades, he flies about 8,700 miles from South Africa to a small village in Croatia. All this in order to reunite with his beloved mate, Milena. She was once injured and now cannot fly. The amazing love story of Klepeton and Milena has made these storks famous in Croatia, Every March, the male stork flies to meet his beloved. They mate and give birth to new babies, which Klepetan then teaches to fly before migrating with them to South Africa. The female stays as she can't follow him, but she's always well taken care of during the cold winter. In 2019, Klepetan returned earlier than usual and then went missing. People thought he died somewhere along the way, but then he still managed to return to his beloved, and apparently the journey was rough. He might have had to travel through areas known for heavy poaching, all to meet his beloved. But that's not even the most impressive migration yet. You may have heard the myth that albatrosses can fly for years, eat, drink, and mate on the fly and land only to lay eggs. Modern science, of course, considers all this nonsense. Nevertheless, it's not uncommon to find birds in the world that are capable of remarkably long flights. Studies have shown that common swifts can stay airborne for an incredible 10 months straight without ever landing on solid ground. This means that they've broken the record for the longest continuous flight time held by alpine swifts. This species can fly for up to 200 days non-stop. The common swifts are just perfectly designed for flying. The mated pairs raise their chicks in Scandinavia for 2 months each year and then go on a long flight. In fact, common swifts have specifically evolved to live in the air where they can eat, drink, and mate, probably even sleep. I gotta say, sleeping while in the air sounds incredibly uncomfortable. Almost like that feeling when you're falling in your sleep and suddenly wake up. It's hard to imagine swifts experiencing that sensation all the time as they fly. This goes for other birds, which are also known for their long flights. Scientists have long been intrigued by the concept of sleep during flight, as it's challenging to imagine how creatures could sleep like that at all. Take the great frigate bird, for example. These birds can stay in the air for up to 2 months without landing on land or water. More importantly, while over the sea, great frigate birds can't interrupt their flight even if they want to. Unlike most seabirds, they can't swim, so they'd sink in the water and eventually drown. It's this peculiarity that's led scientists to suspect that large frigates sleep in the air. Well, they simply wouldn't survive otherwise. Eventually, it was discovered that the great frigate birds do sleep while flying, but very, very little, about 45 minutes a day, 10 seconds at a time. This usually happens as it gets dark, but during in-flight sleep, great frigate birds don't rely on autopilot mode completely. They often sleep with only one side of the brain, leaving the other side awake. But honestly, I won't even have time to fall asleep in such a short time. And they somehow manage to have a proper rest? Isn't it something to be jealous of? Let's get down to earth and leave the birds alone, because I wanted to tell you about the mood lakes. They're actually crater formations in the Kelimutu volcano in central Indonesia's Flores Island. But these 3 lakes have a strange habit of changing color unpredictably, from black to turquoise, from milky white to bloody, or even green. No wonder the locals came up with a lot of legends about the lakes. For instance, they call the lakes the resting place of the souls. Depending on the good or bad deeds done in their lives, the souls end up in different lakes. You know, if you were a villain, you get a lake of blood and stuff like that. It's not clear, though, what this has to do with the color change, because in 2016, for example, the lakes changed color as many as 6 times, though maybe the souls in them mended their ways. Of course, there's also a scientific explanation. It's believed that color changes in the lakes are caused by volcanic vents that release steam and gases. Minerals also play a role in the color change, but the second important factor is the amount of oxygen in the water. Yep, just like with blood, lake waters appear bluer or greener when their oxygen content is low. When they're rich in oxygen, they appear blood red or even black, like cola. It's interesting to note that the colors of the lakes change independently from each other, as each lake has its distinct connection to the activity of the main volcano. However, the cola-colored lake is not the most surprising thing, because there's also an asphalt lake. Some of the strangest lakes in the world are literally filled not with water, but with asphalt, also known as bitumen, the very material roads are paved with. The vast majority of asphalt used today is derived from petroleum, but asphalt also occurs in nature in concentrated form. Sometimes it seeps out of the ground and forms large pits. Liquid asphalt is so thick and viscous that you can actually walk on it. But if you stand on such a surface for too long, you slowly sink into it. Although the lake seems quiescent, the asphalt is slowly moving, and you may even notice flow lines on the surface. As it moves, prehistoric trees and other objects that have fallen into the lake sometimes appear from the depths. Then they disappear, only to reappear at some point. So that's sort of like a liquid time capsule. You know, some things might surprise you. And then there are things you can't possibly wrap your mind around. Like, nature just could not do that. It just couldn't grow soya plant right in a live rat. And yet here it is. The most common rat that an Indian farmer discovered when he was inspecting his crops. A sapling soya plant was sticking out of the back of the animal. Most likely, a seed got into an open wound and then it miraculously sprouted without killing its host, although the seed was located roughly in the neck area. The brain wasn't affected and the poor rat was holding on well, but was in excruciating pain. It would hardly have lasted long if not for the help of people. The soya plant was removed and everything probably ended well. But of course we can't know that for sure because animals usually don't grow plants on themselves. However, there are exceptions, with polar bears being the most surprising of them. I've already mentioned that these unique predators aren't exactly white, but more like transparent due to the hollow fur. Depending on the sunlight, they can appear gray or even reddish-orange. And sometimes they turn green when in zoos, and sunlight has nothing to do with that. Concrete floors and bear enclosures scratch the animal's fur, making tiny holes in the hairs, and algae immediately get in. Algae don't need much, they live and breed inside bear fur, making their hosts a little greenish in the process. Actually, if polar bears lived in a warmer climate, they could turn green naturally, but algae don't like living in the Arctic. However, polar bears don't seem to be inconvenienced in any way because of all the peculiarities of their fur. Meanwhile, the Brachycephalus ferruginous frogs must clearly have a score to settle with nature. The thing is, they are very small amphibians, no bigger than the end of a pencil. And yeah, while these mini frogs look adorable, they aren't really good at jumping. Oddly enough, not because of the size of the legs or something like that, but due to semicircular ear canals. They're simply too small, which means the frog can't control its position mid-jump. Yeah, this tiny frog can jump, but landing would clearly be an issue. Don't worry, they aren't hurt. The only problem is escaping from predators, so the frogs had to acquire camouflage colors and increase their toxicity. And since these frogs are still not extinct, the strategy must be working. Meanwhile, some other frogs are at risk of falling to adapt to climate change because their ability to jump hinges on humidity. As soon as a frog, scientists have tested 3 completely different species, is dehydrated, it loses about 20% of its weight, and with it, its mobility. The drier the amphibians get, the shorter their jumps, and eventually the frogs basically stop moving. Most likely, their blood thickens from lack of moisture, the load on the heart doubles, and it becomes too exhausting to move. So don't miss it when the frog jumps. Soon this might become a rare scene. You don't need me to tell you about the threats posed by global warming, but let's be honest, not all the mortal dangers nature poses for animals are caused by people. Why, sometimes people even act as saviors. Take at least bucks. Nature designed them in a way that bucks need to rub their antlers on trees. This way they remove the velvety skin when the antlers are still new, mark the trees with their scent, demonstrate dominant behavior, communicate, attract females. In short, if you read the studies of various scientists, you start thinking there's some kind of antlers and trees social network essential for survival in the modern animal world. There are many subtleties as to how and what kind of trees the bucks need to rub, but there's one big issue. The antlers are large, hard, and can become a deadly trap for a buck. One wrong movement or a poorly chosen tree, and that's it. Turns into a trap. Sometimes bucks are lucky and people come to the rescue. Well, or they shake their heads so much they finally get free. But sometimes we notice unfortunate animals when it's already too late. Well, it's clear that not a single predator will miss an opportunity to grab a buck who's stuck. But can some average giraffe expect its head to get stuck in a tree? Like this poor fellow who just lived in a Japanese zoo and then one day stuck his head between the branches of a fake tree. Yeah, this tree is fake. But in theory, this could happen in the wild, right? Good thing the keepers helped this guy. What if he was stuck somewhere in the middle of the savannah? I think it would share the buck's fate. Happy predators and a lonely skeleton. But you know, we got carried away with the grand insidious schemes of nature. It's time to take a closer look at really small things. Meet Philornis downsy flies, very stubborn parasites. They lay their eggs in bird nests so that the larvae can feed on the blood and tissues of the chicks. This kills more than half of the chicks, but even survivors can't live in peace. The larvae ruin the beaks of birds, and you can actually see that. I'm serious. Listen to the song of a finch who hasn't suffered from parasites. Now listen to another one, who has to live with a hole in his beak. Birdsong experts say affected finches simply can't hit high notes. Let's do it one more time. Can you hear the difference? Of course, when you don't sound as loud as females would like you to, you no longer attract them, lose the opportunity to procreate. In short, nothing good. Actually, parasites are a problem for many animals, even bats. Flies, of course, can't get to them, unlike a certain fungus that loves the cold. It prefers ambient temperature from 39 to 68 degrees Fahrenheit, the conditions bats choose to hibernate. And while they sleep, the fungus targets the bat's bare skin, especially around the nostrils, causing white nose syndrome. The noses of sick bats actually get white. You can't argue with the name of the disease. There are marks on the wings too. But if only that was the only problem. The fungus makes bats much more active than they're supposed to be, so they do weird things. For example, fly outside during the day. In winter. As a result, the animals expend so much energy they simply don't survive until spring. Though a life in a dark, damp place seems to be a relatively calm one. Although, to be honest, it's hard for me to believe a life like that can be happy. Take, for example, the olm. This amphibian, living in the caves of Bosnia-Herzegovina, a long time ago found itself in a natural trap. In the dark, in isolation, and even underwater. So it had to evolve. This is how we got creatures similar to axolotl relatives. These animals are blind. They can live underwater for more than 100 years, survive for many years with no food, and in addition, they barely move. Seriously, one of the individuals hasn't moved for 7 years. No movement, not even by an inch. Just imagine, you evolve, adapt, and end up as an underdeveloped salamander with the most boring life on the planet. Poor thing. But since we're talking about cave dwellers, have you ever wondered why they're often blind? When you get into some underground cave, it turns out there's not enough food and oxygen. In such conditions, you have to save your strength, and sight, as scientists have found out, takes quite a lot of energy. If you give up sight, you save about 15% of energy, and you don't lose anything. Because it's still dark all around. You just live and upgrade some other skills, or just eat whatever you come across. Just in case, let me clarify that blindness and conservation of energy is just one of the theories. As is usually the case with nature, there must have been many different factors that together provided a certain result. Evolution is based on the principle, it's not stupid if it works. Though looking at koalas, I'd question this statement. Everyone knows koalas eat eucalyptus leaves, right? For now, let's dismiss the fact that due to drought and fires, there's often a lack of them. But even in the places abundant with eucalyptus, koalas die of starvation with stomachs full of food. And this is almost a natural cause of death for them. Well, we're talking about older koalas. When you chew hard eucalyptus leaves all your life, your teeth gradually decay. Eucalyptus is low nutrient. That is, you need to chew it very thoroughly to get some useful substances. But if you're an older koala, your teeth are no longer strong enough. You have to swallow the leaves almost without chewing. The body of koalas simply can't absorb eucalyptus unless it's properly chewed. So an elderly koala dies from hunger with a stomach full of food, because evolution has chosen this fate for the animal. Sloths, by the way, have a similar problem. Only in their case, the issue is the digestion, which doesn't work when it's cold. I know, it sounds absurd, but it's true. Sloths rely on the bacteria and microbes in their stomachs to digest the leaves they eat. These microbes are temperature dependent. When the ambient temperature drops, the sloth's body temperature also drops. And if it gets too low, bacteria and microbes simply die. In this situation, a sloth can eat as many leaves as it likes and still starve to death because it can't absorb the nutrients from the food. The only way to save an animal is to replenish the amount of bacteria in its body. Naturally, with the help of people, the sloths themselves would die faster than they realized they even needed to do something. And it's always like that with nature. It just can't let animals have nice things. Look at the cubs of the Delacour's langur. They're not like the adults at all. This is a very clever adaptation. When you're so bright and conspicuous, females pay more attention to you. You eat more, grow up faster, so you're less likely to be killed by some aggressive male. On the other hand, when you stand out so much, any predator can easily spot you. Any of them. It's like putting on a huge target or a poster that says, "Eat me." So what are the little Delacour's langurs supposed to do? Thanks a lot, evolution. The Tasmanian devil cubs also got a raw deal. According to various sources, one female can give birth to 20 to 50 cubs at a time. Only she has only 4 nipples inside her pouch. There are 5 or even 10 times as many cubs, and this results in fierce competition. Most babies die before they even get their first fur. Why would nature invent something like that? Well, just because it can. On August 21st, 2021, Ali Bulat, a worker from the Russian city of Stavropol, filmed a rare natural phenomenon, the so-called rat king. 5 tiny mice found in a watermelon field had their tails intertwined. Ali Bulat suggested that it was the mouse mom who tangled her kids' tails and tied them to a branch of a watermelon. The field was watered recently and the water reached the burrow where the rodents lived. That's a pretty weird explanation. However, the man managed to untangle the mice, help them dry, and let them go. You might think that if he didn't help, the mice could actually die, slowly and painfully. According to the Museum Victoria Senior Curator of Mammals Kevin Rowe, rodents stuck together simply can't survive for long. They're unable to move. There's no way they can look for food or water. They're stuck with each other and stay in agony until they're untangled or dead. But before you understand what's really true and what's just a myth, you need to get to the bottom of the phenomenon called rat king. Where does it even come from? Well, there are several theories. The first one says the rat king is formed when a group of rats in close quarters, like a burrow, simply huddle together. They have so little space, they don't know where to put their legs and tails. As a result, they get tangled. The second theory sounds similar to the first one, but only at first glance. It's believed that rats tie their tails together when they huddle together if it gets especially cold. But they supposedly do it on purpose. That is, the creation of a rat king is a conscious decision, and rats tie their tails together to survive. And if so, then why untangle the poor rodents? They're just trying to get warm, they're fine. In fact, both theories have arguments to back them up. If rats stick together by accident, the reason for that may lie in sebum. Since rat tails have no fur, rats produce sebum in large quantities to protect and moisturize the surface of their skin. I'm serious. In the place frequented by rats and where they walk the same routes, you can even notice traces of it. Several tails, well lubricated with sebum, get intertwined, and then the fat freezes due to the cold. In addition to that, food leftovers, excrement, and even blood can also act as glue. But the result is the same. Rats' tails get tangled during sleep. And when rats wake up, they try to scatter in different directions, which only tightens the knot. This theory is further supported by the fact that most rat kings were found during a cold season, and usually in close quarters. That is, the rats really could freeze to each other. On the other hand, cold weather could be the reason they got together on purpose. Moreover, if there's a rodent that knows everything about teamwork, it's a rat. I think that's partly why scientists use them to link 2 brains over the internet. I mean, literally. The scientists surgically implanted electrodes into the brains of 2 groups of rats and connected them to computers. Signals from the brain of one rat were transmitted by wire to a computer, then to the brain of another rat. Meanwhile, the animals were not just in different cages, but on different continents. In the end, it turned out that rats are indeed able to exchange information this way, including tactile data. Actually, that's very cool research. I'm surprised I never heard of it before. While the rats bound together might be, at least in theory, doing this intentionally, they can free themselves. But it doesn't work like that for squirrels. Yes, history knows many more examples of the squirrel king than of the rat king. In 2013, this phenomenon was discovered in Saskatchewan, Canada. 6 squirrels got their tails tied together, most likely because of the tree sap, and apparently they died faster than help arrived. Another squirrel king was discovered in 2018 in the state of Nebraska. Again, 6 baby squirrels, again with tangled tails, and again because of the tree sap. Though these ones actually survived. The experts arrived on time, calmed the squirrels down with a mild painkiller, trimmed the sticky fur, and untangled their tails. The whole process took about an hour. Baby squirrels survived, but some still required amputation of irreparably damaged parts of the tail. It's unlikely that rats would require amputation. If you at least once touch the rat tail, then you know it's damn flexible. And yes, rats can actually get themselves out of the Rat King. This in turn confirms that they can create it on purpose. Experts claim rat tails easily unravel at the first suggestion of separation. As soon as it gets warm enough, the Rat King, most likely, breaks up into individual rats that no longer need to keep each other warm. Well, if the knot ends up being too tight, the rats always have a plan B. One of the rats just has to chew its tail off and get out of the trap. In fact, rats are so good at survival that only cockroaches do it better. 75 million years ago, the ancient ancestors of rats were gnawing on the bones of tyrannosaurs. That's a clear hint that rats know how to win the evolutionary race. They can not only climb almost everywhere, eat almost anything, breed in almost any conditions. Check out these teeth. Have you seen them? The front teeth of rats can grow by 5.5 inches per year. Of course, they're worn down over time, but the growth rate suggests that the rat always has a reliable weapon. Strong, sharp molars allow them to chew almost everything, including cinder blocks, wood, bricks, and lead pipes. So chewing off its own tail is not a problem for the rat. Though the tail will hardly grow back, unlike with a lizard. Or will it? It all depends on the species. There are actually rodents over there that can regenerate their tail. And these are the African spiny mice. When Marvel Comics created a superhero who could heal dreadful injuries, perhaps they should have called him the African spiny mouse instead of the Wolverine. Yeah, it wouldn't sound so menacing, but just think about it. These animals can jettison up to 60% of the skin along their back to get out of a predator's grip and survive. 60%! The skin of African spiny mice is very easy to tear, but it's regenerated with a huge speed. Wounds stop bleeding, quickly heal, and shrink by 64% during the day, whereas the rat requires from 5 to 7 days to completely cover the wound with new skin. The African spiny mouse can do this in just 3 days. There won't even be scars on the regenerated skin. In addition, the African spiny mouse can seal holes in its ears and regenerate toe tips without any problems. So if the African spiny mice got their tails tied, they wouldn't have any problems at all. Just bite the tail off and be on your way. But back to the rats. If they're the ones who create a Rat King and then can get out of it, why do people find them dead in the vast majority of cases? After all, over the entire history of mankind, well, until 2005, only 58 reliable Rat Kings were registered, 6 of which ended up in museums. That doesn't look like great survival odds. However, there is a theory that explains this, and it points to people. People love money. Therefore, tying the dead rat's tails together to pass it off for the Rat King and then sell it to the museum is a rather easy way to earn money. In any case, no one would have refused this opportunity before. And not only before, not so long ago, donkeys painted like zebras were found in the Cairo Zoo. The owners wanted to have exotic animals, but they were too expensive. Paint and donkeys were cheap. The thing is, the paint melted under the hot sun, and the characteristic color of the zebra disappeared right in front of the visitors. Well, whoops. But there is another theory to explain why the tangled rats are found dead. Perhaps they died before they managed to get out. The causes can be very different. Or something prevented rats from getting out of the trap. For example, in the case of the Rat King housed in the Otago Museum in Dunedin, New Zealand, curators say the rats became entangled in horsehair. Rats fell from the rafters of the shipping office, apparently right on people. They were not happy about that, and beat them to death with an instrument. The Rat King died entirely. Sometimes rats end up in something sticky. I mean in something aside from their biological fluids. The rodents fall asleep, huddled into a ball to warm up, get tangled while sleeping, and when they wake up, they can no longer get out. If their tails are not only tangled but also stuck together, getting out of the Rat King is almost impossible. These poor fellows risk not only dying from hunger or thirst, when they're tied to each other, they completely lose their speed, agility, dexterity, and all those qualities that actually allowed rodents to survive from the time of dinosaurs to the present day. In this state, rats are easy prey for both predators and people who don't mind putting them into some museum. naturally in a dead state. Because every rat king is a sensation. Remember that story from the beginning of the video? Believe it or not, it is considered one of the first reliable proof of the existence of rat kings in general. Of course, the size also matters. Perhaps the oldest specimen of all rat kings was found in Altenburg, Germany in 1828. It includes 32 rodents and is the largest specimen in the world. According to the museum where the Rat King is housed, it was discovered by Miller Steinbruck when he was cleaning his chimney. And that's all the info we have. We don't know who this Miller was or under what circumstances he found the Rat King. But at least these 32 poor rats were mentioned in the Guinness World Records. Of course, people began to find rat kings much earlier, though back then it never occurred to anyone to preserve them. Why would they? Imagine you live in Europe in the 1500s. The first record about the rat kings dates back to 1564, not the best era to appreciate rats or figure out why their tails get tangled. However, people came up with a legend. They believed that elderly rats known for their wisdom were sitting on the tangled tails of other rats. It was believed that other rats treated the elderly rat as royalty, hence the name Rat King. Of course, no one was exactly ecstatic about such kings. They were considered a very bad sign, a harbinger of misfortune, illness, or even death. Moreover, I can't even blame our distant ancestors for being superstitious. Yes, at the time, people did not explicitly connect the plague with rat fleas, but the rat kings are more common where the rat population exploded. So places where rat kings are found can be ridden with deadly disease. Taking all this into account, it becomes clear why the reports of the living specimen of the rat kings are so rare. If something portends death, it's better to get rid of this something. The good news is that people are much less superstitious now, so perhaps scientists will have a real opportunity to study living rat kings and finally figure out what's what. Look at these photos. The cow seems so exhausted you can literally see right through it. No, really, I can actually see the ground on the other side of its body. The animal was killed by starvation and drought. And this is definitely not an isolated case. Around the world, especially in arid places like Africa, livestock periodically suffer from malnutrition. In 2016, farmers in Ethiopia lost most of their livestock to the worst drought in 50 years. While you can somehow fix the water problem, the main source of food for cows simply disappears. However, cows are not hummingbirds that need to eat every day to avoid immediate death. Strictly speaking, cows are quite resilient and can survive even under extreme conditions. It's believed that cows can survive for up to 2 weeks without food, but after just a few days, they start to experience health problems. During prolonged starvation, exhaustion becomes clearly visible. One can see the ribs and bones, and the cow feels physically weak. Its whole body is supported by the residual fat accumulated inside the body. When it runs out, the heart stops beating and the animal dies. The end. A cow needs a lot of food to feel fine. It can consume 2% of its body weight each day, which is about 24 pounds. So even if there's sparse vegetation around caused by drought or insufficient water sources nearby, this is not enough for long-term survival. It's known that a cow will last for 60 days tops on a meager diet. However, after 4 or 5 days without food, the cow's immune system begins to deteriorate, making cows prone to diseases that can be lethal. Needless to say, no mammal can come close to fish, snakes, and insects in terms of tenacity. The video of a cockchafer beetle with missing insides has gone viral on the internet because of the beetle's special ability to live without some vital organs. Yes, some insects can survive even after losing important parts of their bodies. Well, such an insect is more like a zombie, since it can do almost nothing but slowly wander around aimlessly. But here's a more interesting fact. Some insects can still walk even after they die thanks to their decentralized nervous system. This means that instructions written by nature are still active in the insect, causing the already lifeless body to keep moving for a short period of time until it runs out of energy. In short, there was no shutdown command, so the insect carries on. However, there is another theory. Perhaps this phenomenon is caused by the parasites that penetrate the insect's body and seize control over its brain after death, making it move even without vital organs to spread and keep multiplying. And frankly, I prefer the theory that doesn't involve parasites. There are certain things you should not do. For example, you definitely shouldn't attack a turtle when you're a rosy pelican. Why? Well, the turtle didn't appreciate the idea of being eaten, so the retribution was terrible. The turtle not only broke the bird's beak, it tore it to shreds and forced it to retreat. You know, I've never thought a pelican's beak is actually quite a fragile thing. I mean, this is their throat pouch. After all, it's made of skin that can be ripped quite easily. As soon as a pelican catches a fish with a hook in its mouth, this tiny piece of metal will puncture the pouch. Of course, the hole left by the hook won't look the same as the aftermath of the turtle retribution, but there's nothing good about it anyway. Fish usually either fall out of such holes or get stuck in them. Hardly this'll make a pelican happy. And it looks like the pelican's jaws, like their pouches, are shaped by the environment the bird lives in. The jaws of the white pelican are much less stress-resistant than, for example, that of the brown one. Keep in mind, white pelicans often feed from the surface, while brown pelicans dive after the fish and open their beaks underwater while moving. This requires certain durability. By the way, scientists figured this out while simultaneously studying pelicans and whales. Seems like these creatures can't possibly have anything in common, though they feed in the same way. They open their mouths, scoop the water along with the prey, then discard all the excess. I never thought about it before. But back to our rosy pelican, who wasn't lucky with its lunch. Can the bird even survive with a ruptured throat pouch? At least in theory? Well, no. The fish will simply fall out and the bird will eventually starve to death. Unless a human comes to the rescue. Steve and I aren't vets to be 100% certain about that, but we found one rescue story. In Australia, a pelican was attacked by a shark. A shark! Sounds much tougher than a turtle. The predator literally bit off a chunk from the throat pouch. The pelican was rescued by people, brought to the vets, and they spent several hours in the operating room applying 200 stitches and tending to the wounds of the bird. The story ended well because the pelican, he was named Lucky by the way, got help in time and was able to return to the wild in just 10 days. But don't think we're going to tell you another story of a hungry pelican with a poor choice of prey. This time, it was the bird who was the prey. For young sharks, birds are the perfect target to hone their hunting skills, especially songbirds who won't be able to take off quickly if they accidentally fall into the water. But pelicans will do too. After all, sometimes they're clumsy enough that young sharks use them for training. They need to learn how to bite prey properly. Speaking of prey, how come that pelican from the beginning of the video dared to attack the turtle? After all, pelicans mostly eat fish, perfecting their hunting strategies up to the tiniest detail. Many pelicans fish by swimming together in groups. They can form a line or U-shape, drive fish into shallow water, and then simply scoop it out with the water like soup. But for pelicans, fish is something like a healthy food that parents and doctors recommend. It's pretty hard to make yourself eat broccoli when there's so many burgers around, so pelicans are always ready to have some poor amphibians, crustaceans, and insects for a snack, even smaller birds or mammals. In short, the problem is that pelicans are ready to stuff anything into their beaks. I'm serious. They would try to eat anything that seems even slightly edible. Pinch a giraffe's leg? Why not? It looks delicious. Try to bite a dog. Swallow a bear cub. A cat? Donkey ear? Hell, even a kangaroo seems like a good enough dinner for a pelican. Or even a capybara. Good thing capybaras are friendly enough not to pay attention to this. It's one thing when they try to eat something alive, but the pelican that swallowed the phone? And not just swallowed, but first snatched it from someone's hand. Fortunately, people came to the rescue again and pulled the phone out of the bird. Though actually, this story could have a different ending because pelicans are too cocky. Sometimes they try to swallow large, very large prey, and they just choke. Like in the north of Minnesota, where a pelican decided to eat a large walleye. But the fish got stuck in the bird's throat because it was too big. The pelican died and the walleye survived. If fish could snicker wickedly, that walleye probably would. Another similar story happened in the Soravar bird sanctuary in India. Again, there was a large pelican and a large fish. Well, this time there were people nearby who took out an overly large supper from the bird's throat in time and did surgery. Seems like pelicans, with their gluttony and strange conviction they can eat everything, need people's help more often than any other animals. However, sometimes they don't need surgeons. This woman, Beth Weir, is an animal rescue volunteer. And yes, she just put her hand down the pelican's throat and pulled the fish out. That's right, Beth did it with her bare hands. Did this pelican know he was trying to swallow much more than he could? Hard to say. Maybe he acted like that fellow who wanted to eat a capybara. Or maybe he just made a tiny mistake in his calculations. And now let's go back to that turtle from the beginning of the video. It's not even that it was too big for a pelican. The thing is, it wasn't the turtle you'd want to take on. It's not entirely clear from the video, but Steve and I think it was a narrow-headed soft-shell turtle. It's quite large and it's found in India. It's also bloody carnivorous and aggressive. Burrowing into the sand, the turtle waits for the prey to be within its reach. When this happens, the turtle's head quickly pops out of the shell to grab it. And yes, these turtles have very, very powerful jaws. It's an animal that'll most certainly bite a human if given the opportunity because it can. It doesn't like company. Moreover, judging by some studies, some soft-shell turtle species bite with about the same force as not very big dogs. But not all dogs are aggressive. And now imagine this creature suddenly realizes that some kind of pelican's trying to eat it? Yeah, seems like the pelican got off easy. A relative of the Indian turtle, the Florida softshell turtle, which lives in the southeastern United States, has such a powerful bite, it can actually bite off a person's finger. If it tries hard enough, of course. They also warn future turtle owners about this. Even baby turtle bites are very painful. But our unfortunate rosy pelican suffered not only because of the powerful jaws and bad temper of the turtle, its claws are also a formidable weapon. It has 3 on each forelimb. These claws are sharp enough to tear apart anything that gets in the way. Actually, let's be honest. Turtles quite often try to eat birds. For example, a snapping turtle, a large, powerful animal, once grabbed a pelican right in front of a bunch of bystanders. Some of them suggested it was some kind of self-defense. The turtle was just scared for its life. But snapping turtles are omnivores. Careless birds are just an item on their regular menu. The pelican from the previous video was lucky. The bird managed to free itself. Perhaps it was too large, because snapping turtles have a specially designed hunting tactic. They grab a bird that's landed on the water by the leg, clench the jaw tight, drag the bird underwater, keep it there until the poor prey drowns. Well, then it's lunchtime. A simple and effective way of hunting, which actually doesn't even require any special effort from the turtle. By the way, if the turtle really wants to, it can also hunt a pigeon. True, it'll have to get out of the water for a while, but the strategy will remain the same. And if you think that only those turtles that live in the water and move fast enough eat birds, then their terrestrial counterparts also don't mind having a bird for breakfast. Or even better if that's a chick that can't fly away. Yes, a giant tortoise hunts a cute bird. It looks a bit ridiculous and clumsy, but the tortoise doesn't give up. Scientists were shocked when they saw it. That is, for a long time, it was believed that giant tortoises, which can now only be found in the Seychelles and Galapagos Islands, are herbivores. Well, occasionally they might eat snail shells and bird bones. Turned out that sometimes they also eat birds whole. And how do you like this fact? Tortoises rise up, extending their limbs and tail so that finches could rid them of ticks. Is that a perfectly normal situation in the animal world? Of course. But sometimes, right during the cleaning, tortoises drop unexpectedly. And the birds, which at that moment are in the lower part of the shell, are flattened. And then the tortoises eat them! Stories like this always seem like jokes to tortoise experts, until there was footage of a tortoise eating a chick. And I get why the scientists were in doubt, but in order to check whether a tortoise can actually be predatory, you need to understand whether it's capable of digesting meat. So Steve and I checked the research and turns out that no one knows that. Scientists have no idea because it never occurred to anyone that tortoises could be predators. Hunters. Well, it does sound ridiculous. There are no doubts about the snapping turtle, though. It's aggressive and has very powerful jaws. Well, not like that of a croc, of course, but the bite force is estimated at 208 to 226 newtons. Enough to break a bone. Even an alligator snapping turtle, which has a weaker bite, can easily crush a human hand. And yes, it's just a fake model, but its density is the same as that of a real one. Somewhere around 160 newtons is enough to crush the hand to pieces. Actually, there's been a circulating myth that the alligator snapping turtle, not to mention the common snapping turtle, can bite everything that gets into its mouths. Even a very strong piece of wood. Even a broom handle. So, that's not a myth. Scientists have tested that, and turtles really can do that. When you fell, your broom, well, there was a turtle and, well... When I was a little kid, I was terrified of sharks. I didn't live near the sea, but it always seemed to me that sharks could show up in a river or even in a lake. What difference does it make if it's still full of water? It's a shame no one explained to me back then that sharks explode when they're in fresh water. Of course, it doesn't happen all the time. There are species that can live in rivers. But most sharks simply have to retain a certain amount of salt in their bodies. Take at least the great white shark, the most fearsome marine predator. If it suddenly decided to swim from the sea up the river, the higher salinity level of the shark's body compared to the surroundings would result in bloating. Though gradually fresh water would flow through the gills. The shark would start losing salt. It's quite possible that this would cause it to expand until it exploded. Sounds kind of weird. To see how it works, you need to understand what happens to the body cells in the salt water. The process that keeps the concentration of salt in fish cells at a comfortable level is called osmosis. Essentially, water goes into the cells and back. Freshwater fish, such as goldfish, are saltier than their surroundings. Osmosis causes the surrounding water to enter their bodies through their gills and skin. Saltwater fish, like tuna, are less salty than the water around them. Therefore, in this case, osmosis forces the water out of their bodies. If saltwater fish end up in freshwater, the process is reversed. That is, the fish will absorb liquid. Their unprepared cells swell and bloat, possibly rupturing. And although the shark's body isn't like the body of tuna, it generally works the same way. Even fish that can swim freely between fresh and salt water still need time to get used to changing surroundings. Similarly, humans need to wait to adjust to lower oxygen levels at higher altitudes. We can't say for sure how long a great white shark can survive in freshwater because no one has done such experiments. Well, if they did, the scientific community never heard of them. But aquarium experts say that some saltwater fish can stay in freshwater from 30 seconds to 10 minutes. Longer exposure will kill them, and I don't think the shark will last much longer. Unless, of course, it's a bull shark. Bull sharks don't care about the salinity of the water. They have special physiological adaptations that allow them to live in freshwater. Not something to be excited about. Actually, because bull sharks are known to be aggressive and seem to be responsible for most coastal shark attacks. This species has been seen 2,500 miles up the Amazon River in South America. Bull sharks also live in the freshwater Lake Nicaragua. That's because their kidneys recycle the salt inside the body, and special glands located near the tail also help retain salt. But why would bull sharks need such an ability at all? Other fish somehow survive without it. Well, this adaptation could appear to ensure the safety of the offspring. Due to their resistance to freshwater, young bull sharks can stay where other sharks will definitely not eat them. And yet, there's a price for everything nature gives. To get some unique skill, you need to give up something else. The question is, what exactly have bull sharks given up? If they really felt equally well in both fresh and salt water, they would be the dominant species in coastal waters. But we don't see this happening, which means that something is stopping them. But let's leave the bull sharks alone for now, because the fact that sharks could swell seemed way more exciting to me. Turned out, swelling is not necessarily a life-threatening condition. There is a shark species that swells on purpose. That is, it's a conscious action, not the result of the shark swimming in the wrong area. The swell shark hasn't been thoroughly studied, but scientists know that it can swell twice its size as a defense mechanism. They also know that this pink specimen is an albino, which is why it looks so weird. However, regardless of the pigments, when this shark feels threatened, it bends its body into a horseshoe shape, grabs its tail fin with its mouth, and sucks water into its stomach. Naturally, because of the water, the body immediately swells, and it becomes much more difficult for predators to bite or swallow such prey. If you don't get what the problem is, try biting a balloon. It's really hard. Oxygen also enters the stomach along with water, which is why the shark can't sink back down. Only after releasing everything it swallowed, the shark returns to normal life, while making a sound similar to a dog's barking. So if someone suddenly barks at you from the sea, don't be surprised, it's just a deflating shark. Unlike other saltwater fish, whales can survive in freshwater for some time, about a couple weeks, much longer than all the other sea creatures. However, you shouldn't expect to see whales in the rivers near your home. First of all, because freshwater is a stressful environment for them. This is not their usual habitat where, moreover, there is no food whales are used to. The salty ocean is large and allows whales to dive deep where they can find ample food sources. What are they supposed to eat in freshwater? But the ocean is not only a source of food. The water there has special properties. The researchers noted that the usually smooth and shiny skin of whales became irregular in freshwater. And the longer the whale stays in the unusual environment, the worse things get. Skin infections, then ulcers. Why is this happening? The reason is quite simple. Ocean water contains salts and minerals that help get rid of these infections and heal cuts and wounds. The whale has to deal with quite a lot of injuries. Even such giants suffer from attacks by sharks and orcas. There's even evidence that wounds inflicted by ship propellers in freshwater healed much more slowly than expected. The same goes for dolphins. Researchers have records saying that bottlenose dolphins living in fresher water, such as Florida's Indian River Lagoon, are more likely to develop skin diseases. But the most unexpected effect the sea salt has is on the hearing of whales. Whales use sonar systems that bounce high-frequency sound waves from objects in the water. Well, you know how it works. Sound waves are reflected back to the whale if they hit something big enough, and the whale knows where that object is. The salt in the water helps the whales hear more clearly, which means that in freshwater, they don't navigate in space that well. Though whales are really lucky they can deal with freshwater. In any case, they're luckier than some jellyfish. Well, it's hard to expect impressive tenacity from a creature that looks like jelly. Jellyfish are 95% water, and their cells contain the same amount of various solutes as the seawater around them. Remember how osmosis works for creatures living in saltwater? Once in freshwater, they swell and rupture. In the case of jellyfish, you can see this quite clearly. However, even for more complex living organisms accustomed to salt water, freshwater can cause grave, sometimes irreparable damage. Steve found some pretty shocking examples. In 2012, a huge leatherback turtle swam into the Shubenacadie River in Nova Scotia. It was spotted about 12 miles up the river, very far from salt water. The locals tried to help the poor animal by pouring water on it to avoid dehydration, but this water didn't contain enough salt and other substances necessary to sustain life. Eventually, the turtle died. Another similar story happened in France. For unknown reasons, a sick orca swam into the Seine River and couldn't find a way back. People followed the animal for several weeks, tried to guide it towards the sea using drones that reproduced the sounds of orcas, but this didn't work. Ultimately, the orca got so weak from staying in freshwater, it could no longer fight the infection, and also died. Overall, the chances of you encountering some kind of dangerous marine creature in the nearest river are quite small, and if you do, it'll ignore you since it has way more pressing issues to deal with. But I'm not the only one who finds the very idea of the possible encounter scary. For example, there's a legend about a freshwater octopus living in the lakes of Oklahoma. There are occasional reports that look like urban horror stories. An allegedly unknown animal called the Oklahoma octopus grabs swimmers with its tentacles and drags them down to the bottom. Perhaps because it's a vile creature. Or maybe it's hungry. Sounds creepy? You bet it does. It's almost like the Kraken, only in harmless freshwater lakes. But what the hell is an octopus even doing so far away from the sea? You can't help but thinking about a rare ancient animal still living in the lake since the times when they used to be a shallow sea. Over tens of millions of years, this creature had enough time to learn how to adapt to freshwater. Though it's much more likely that this is just another horror story like those about Chupacabra or the Loch Ness Monster. First, in order to fully adapt to life in freshwater, an animal must change its physiology completely, or rather, fundamentally. Not a single octopus, even the most ancient, can do something like this. And second, these are artificial lakes created by people in the 20th century. So even if the ancient octopuses wanted to, they couldn't have survived and evolved in these lakes over tens of millions of years. The lake simply didn't exist back then. Actually, freshwater is not something an octopus can endure. It won't be able to breathe there and will die much faster than it tries to adapt. And yet, sometimes animals migrate to freshwater even when they aren't adapted to it. This is a real paradox. Increasingly, more dolphins are moving into rivers and channels, places where these marine animals can't survive. Scientists have no idea why this is happening, which certainly makes them worried. After all, dolphins can survive outside of salt water only for a short time. Like I already said before, it starts affecting their skin after a while. First comes irritation, then peeling, which bacteria and fungi use to their advantage. Then comes some nasty infection, which causes the death of the animal. But dolphins are very smart creatures that just have to know that fresh water is destructive for them. So why are they deliberately swimming there to meet their doom? So far, scientists have no answer. By the way, don't think that only marine creatures feel sick in fresh water. Freshwater animals also die in salt water. And this happens due to dehydration. Yeah, from dehydration in the water. To survive, saltwater fish constantly drink a lot of water. Yeah, it's salty, so they have to adapt. They filter excess salt from the bloodstream through the gills and kidneys when they urinate. Freshwater fish have never had these problems, so they don't need to drink. So they just don't know how to do it. Water constantly penetrates their bodies through their gills, skin, or mouth when they eat, but when the water around is salt, freshwater fish just can't handle it. The result is pretty obvious, albeit a bit ridiculous. They die of dehydration when they're literally surrounded by water. See you later.